In this video, we are going to be talking about how to solve problems using the order of operations, also known as BEDMAS, or you may have heard it called BODMAS, PEDMAS, or PODMAS. They all kind of mean the same thing, which is essentially that we have a specific order that we want to solve problems in. Now, before we get started, I just want to go over a few skills or things that you'll need to remember as you're solving these problems. So the first is powers, or also known as exponents or orders. You have to remember that the exponent tells us how many times we multiply that number by itself. So 3 squared is not 3 times 2. And I think a lot of us know this, but as we're going through the math and we're kind of maybe doing it mentally and very quickly, we see 3 squared and we automatically think 6. But it's not 6 because it's not 3 times 2. It actually means 3 times 3, which is 9. So just be careful that as you're going through that you remember what those powers mean. Now, if there is a negative inside of brackets, that means that negative, or the exponent, also applies to the negative. So you'll see here I have negative 9 in brackets squared is the same as saying negative 9 times negative 9, which is 81. If that negative is not inside of brackets, that means the squared only applies to the 9, not the negative sign. So that means it's negative 9 times 9, which is negative 81. So just be really careful with your powers and with any sort of negative signs that you come across. Now, the opposite of powers, or the opposite of square, is square root. So 6 squared means 6 times 6, but the square root means what number times itself equals this. So the square root of 36 is 6, because 6 times 6 is 36. So they're the opposites of each other. Now let's dive into the order of operations. So when there is more than one operation needed, we need to solve them in a very specific way. So for example, you'll see on the left there, I've taken the equation and I've just solved it from left to right. So I did 8 plus 6 first, which got me to 14. I then divided by 3. I then subtracted 1, and then I multiplied 4. And on the right, I used order of operations, and I ended up with 2 very different answers. And essentially what happened when they were, way back in the 1800s, or probably even before that, they were solving different math problems, and they noticed that depending on who they gave the problem to, they were getting different answers, which isn't what we want when we're developing formulas. And so they decided to come up with sort of a standard way or some rules around the order that they would use. And we still use that today. And that order is BEDMAS. So the B stands for brackets, which means you need to solve what's inside of the brackets first. So just because there's brackets around it doesn't mean that number is more important. It means that you want to solve what's inside of the brackets first. The next is exponents. You want to solve any exponents that are in the problem. The next bit is crucial, and this is probably where a lot of people make mistakes. The D and the M stand for division or multiplication, and they're actually equal to each other. They have the same level of importance. So you're going to solve the division and multiplication in whichever order they appear. So I'm highlighting that bit there because that's super, super important, in whichever order they come up. So what this means, if I had something like 3 times 4 divided by 2, in this case, I have multiplication and I have division. I'm going to solve 3 times 4 first. If I had 3 divided by 4 times 2, I'm still going to do the 3 divided by 4 first. So when you have division and multiplication in a problem, you do them in the order they come up. And that same rule applies for addition and subtraction. You solve the addition and subtraction in whichever order they appear. So if I have 3 plus 4 minus 2, or 3 minus 4 plus 2, in both of these situations, I'm going to do that first bit first. So when I'm thinking of BEDMAS, I actually like to write it like this. To remind ourselves that division and multiplication are of equal importance and addition and subtraction are of equal importance. Now, something else we need to be aware of when we're doing these types of questions is hidden division and multiplication signs. So when we are writing in math, we don't really like to write multiplication signs because it can be very easy to confuse a multiplication sign for the letter X. And so we don't really like to use them. Instead, what we do is just kind of squish them together and use brackets to show that it's multiplication. So 4 bracket 5 minus 2 really means 4 times 5 minus 2, but we don't like to write that multiplication sign in there. Instead, we just squish it together. And same with 4a, really means 4 times a, but we're not going to write that multiplication sign in there because then it will look like 4xa. So in both of these examples, we have a hidden multiplication sign there. We also tend to use fractions to show division. Not always, but a lot of times. So for example, here I have 4 minus 2 over 5 plus 3. That fraction line really means divide, but if I wanted to write it out with a division sign, I'd have to put brackets around the top and the bottom. And same with the one you'll see below that with algebra. And so what this is really saying is I'm going to treat the top and bottom of the fractions almost like they're their own questions, and then I'm going to divide their answers at the end. So as you're going through these problems, we're going to keep several things in mind. One, we're keeping track of our powers and square roots. We're remembering the order of operations and looking out for those hidden division and multiplication signs. So let's try a few out. So let's look at this first example here. 8 squared plus 7 bracket 12 minus 3 bracket. So if we are keeping our BEDMAS in mind, the first thing I'm going to do is brackets, which I have right here. So I'm going to solve the brackets first. What I'm going to do is write out everything else in the problem and then replace that part of the problem with its correct answer. So 12 minus 3 gives me 9. Okay, and then I'm going to move on. Even though I still have written brackets there, there's nothing inside of the brackets for me to solve. So I'm going to move on to exponents, which I have right here. So again, I'm going to write out everything else. And then I'm going to replace that part with the answer. So 8 squared, remember, means 8 times 8, which is 64. Now, I hope you've seen it, but we do have a multiplication. We have one of our hidden multiplication signs here. So we're going to get 64 plus, and 7 times 9 is 63. And finally, I'm left with some addition here. 64 plus 63 is 127. 7. So let's look at our next question here. So I don't have any brackets. I don't have any exponents, but I do have division and multiplication. Remember, we're going to do them in the order they appear in the question. So we're going to do 32 divided by 4 first. So I'm going to write out everything else and then replace that part with its answer. So 32 divided by 4 is 8. And now I have my multiplication. So I'm going to write out everything else 8 times 5 is 40. And I'm left with my addition to get an answer of 46. Great, so I have 2 problems here I'm going to put up. I would like you to pause the video, try them out, and then start it up again when you're ready. Okay, let's look at this next one. So again, I don't have brackets, don't have exponents, but I do have a division. So we're going to do the division first. I'm going to write out everything else and then replace. So 72 divided by 9 is 8. And now I'm left with just addition and subtractions, and we're going to do them in the order they come up in the question. So I'm going to do 12 plus 8 first, which is 20. Then I'm going to do 20 plus 11, which is 31. And then I'm going to subtract my 9, which is 22. Okay, let's try this next one. So I'm looking for brackets. I don't really have brackets written. However, in order to do that square root, I'm going to have to solve what's under it first. So it's almost like what's under the square root is in brackets. We're going to focus on that. They do also have exponents, so that is the next part. So we're going to work on our exponents. Now, some people will say, well, there's a square root and there's squares. So actually, this part of the problem is going to simplify just to 12 plus 5. But that actually does not work like that because of the addition sign. So if you've tried to kind of shorten your work a little bit by canceling out the square root and square signs, it doesn't work like that because of the addition sign inside of here. So you can't actually have them cancel out. So let's work it out in full. What I'm going to do is keep my square root. I'm writing everything else out. And under the bracket, I'm going to do 12 squared and 5 squared. So 12 squared is 144, and 5 squared is 25. I now need to do my addition under the square root because I can't do my square root until I've completed that addition. And 144 plus 25 is going to be 169. And now I can do my square root. Square root, in terms of BEDMAS, is going to have the same importance as squared, because remember, square and square root are just opposites of each other, just like division and multiplication and addition and subtraction. So they're of equal importance to the squares. So my square root of 169 is 13. Okay, so I don't have any more brackets, don't have any more exponents or square roots, and so I have to do my division. So 27 divided by 81 is 1/3, and I'm going to keep that as a fraction just because it's not a very nice decimal and we never want to round until the very, very end. So depending on what you want your final answer to be in, as a fraction, as a decimal, I tend to keep them as a fraction if they're not a nice decimal like 0.5 or 0.2 or something like that. If it's a repeated decimal, I like to keep it as a fraction. It also then makes my subtraction here nice and easy. So I have 13, I'm taking away 1/3, I have 12 wholes and 2/3 left over. Okay, here's 2 more questions for you. Pause the video, try them out, and then start it up again when you're ready. I know these ones look a little scary because of that fraction, but remember to treat the top and bottom of the fractions almost like they're their own problem, and then you're going to do the division after. So remember that that fraction line is really a hidden division sign that's done at the end. Okay, so try them out, start up the video again when you're ready. Okay, let's look at this first one. So I don't have any brackets. But I do have some exponents, so let's work on these two exponents here. And 2 to the power of 4 is going to be 16, and 4 to the power of 2 is also 16. I then have some multiplications. Four times 3 is 12, and 5 times 2 is 10. I then have addition and subtraction, so we need to do them in the order they come up in the question. So I'm going to do those bits first and do my plus 10 at the end. So 12 plus 16 is 28. 2 take away 16 is going to be negative 14. So be careful here. If you haven't done the addition and subtraction in the correct order, you're not going to get the right answer on the bottom there. So just be careful with that. I then can do my addition on the bottom, which results in a negative 7. Okay, and last one, we have a bracket to do first. So we're going to do the exponent that's inside of the bracket there. So I'm writing everything else out. And 2 squared is 4. I then have the exponent on this bracket to do, so I'm going to write out everything else. Now remember, this negative here is outside of the bracket, so it's not attached to that power of 3. So the power of 3 is only attached to the 4 inside of the bracket. And 4 to the power of 3 is 64. Now I have a multiplication on the bottom. And some addition and subtraction on the top. So 3 take away 64 is going to be negative 61. Negative 61 plus 12 is negative 49. And now I can do my division, and I get negative 4.9. I would like you to now think back over how you've done throughout this video and give yourself a thumbs down, a pointer, or a thumbs up depending on how you're doing. So a thumbs down if you're having some trouble and you know you need some help with this, a pointer if you think I just maybe need a little bit more practice, and a thumbs up if you're thinking I've got this, I don't really need any more help or practice.